April 14, 1943. At Fleet Radio Unit Pacific in Pearl Harbor, the air was heavy with the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes. In this room, technicians were engaged in the war's most silent, relentless battle, deciphering the Japanese naval code known as magic. A pencil moved across the paper as intercepted Japanese naval characters transformed into plain English text. The message was from Commander-in-Chief Combined Fleet, detailing an inspection tour for Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The precision was staggering. Exact arrival times at forward bases. Departure, 0600 hours, Tokyo time, April 18th from Rabaul. Arrival, Bougainville Airfield, 0800 hours. Transport via 2 specific Type 1 medium bombers. Escort complement, 60 fighters. Technical Sergeant Harold Fudina, a Nisei translator, double-checked the translation. Commander William Goggins, directing FRU PAC operations, immediately recognized the message's explosive significance. Within minutes, the decoded intelligence was in the hands of Commander Edwin Layton, Pacific Fleet intelligence officer. Layton's eyes widened as he absorbed the implications. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, would be within range of American fighters for exactly one opportunity. What none of them knew was that this single decoded message would trigger the most audacious fighter interception in aviation history, an act of strategic assassination that was considered unthinkable just months earlier. The Pacific War had taught American forces that individual Japanese commanders were not just military leaders, they were irreplaceable national symbols whose death would cause profound psychological damage. Yamamoto, more than any other figure, embodied the genius, the ruthlessness, and the strategic vision of the Japanese Navy. His elimination was a chance to deliver a precise, surgical strike against the mind of the enemy. But a paralyzing dilemma immediately arose: the ethical and political consequences of deliberately targeting a military leader. Was it justified? And perhaps more critically, could the intelligence be trusted? The debate moved up the chain of command with lightning speed. From Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, all the way to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. The primary fear was not moral. It was purely strategic. If the Americans acted on this information, the Japanese would know their naval code had been compromised. The ability to read Japan's mail, the single most critical American intelligence advantage, would vanish overnight, potentially prolonging the war indefinitely. Nimitz and his intelligence officers debated intensely. However, the unique value of the target, Yamamoto himself, tipped the scales. Nimitz sent the terse message back to Washington. Permission to act on intelligence granted. Roosevelt gave the final authorization, but with a firm directive. The operation must be executed with such flawless secrecy and cover that the Japanese would believe the interception was a result of sheer luck or exceptional reconnaissance, not a code break. The success of the operation, named Operation Vengeance, depended not only on killing Yamamoto, but on convincing the enemy that the fundamental pillars of their communication security were still sound. The task of execution fell to the commander of the fighter command in the South Pacific, Major General Walter H. Hale, who immediately delegated the planning to Brigadier General Kenneth C. Kenney and the pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, based at Guadalcanal. The challenge they faced was unprecedented. Yamamoto's flight path from Rabaul to Bougainville would take him to the extreme absolute limit of any existing American fighter aircraft's operational range. They had to fly 400 miles, conduct an intercept, engage an escort, and return, a total distance of nearly 1,000 miles over open ocean and hostile jungle. No fighter plane in history had ever flown a combat mission this long. The only aircraft capable of attempting this feat was the P-38G Lightning, the sleek, twin-boomed fighter known for its exceptional speed and high-altitude performance. But even the Lightning needed modifications. The key was the external fuel tank, or drop tank. To carry enough fuel for the 1,000-mile journey, the P-38s would require two enormous 165-gallon drop tanks hanging beneath their wings. These tanks were typically designed for ferrying and were rarely used in combat, and never with two on a single mission. The sheer weight and drag made the P-38 nearly unmanageable, pushing the airframe and engines to their mechanical limits. A complex flight plan was meticulously devised. The intercept force would consist of 18 P-38 Lightnings. 4 planes were designated as the killer flight, tasked with the actual interception and destruction of the bombers. The remaining 14 P-38s, flying at various altitudes, were the cover flight, designed to engage the Japanese Zero escort and keep them away from the killer flight. The entire mission had to be executed at exactly 0934 hours, the precise moment the Yamamoto's bombers were due to arrive over Bougainville, providing only a 4-minute window for the ambush. The killer flight was assigned to the 339th Fighter Squadron, led by Major John Wilson, with Captain Thomas G. Lanphier, Jr., Lieutenant Rex T. Barber, and Lieutenant Joe Moore filling the other slots. The pilots were given their mission, but were deliberately told a cover story that the Japanese flight was spotted by a persistent coast watcher or a long-range reconnaissance aircraft. No mention of the decoded message was ever made, upholding the strategic secrecy. The morning of April 18, 1943, began with a technical disaster. 2 pilots, including Joe Moore, suffered tire and drop tank failures during takeoff, forcing them to abort. The killer flight was reduced to 3, severely limiting their firepower for the attack. The entire formation, now 16 P-38s, lifted off from Guadalcanal and began their agonizing 400-mile journey, flying low over the water to stay below Japanese radar, maintaining absolute radio silence. Navigation was entrusted to Lieutenant Joe Holmes, who, using celestial navigation and a standard wrist compass, had to guide the formation through miles of empty Pacific to a single point in the sky at a precise moment in time. The flight itself was a test of human endurance. The P-38 cockpits were stiflingly hot, and the air was dead and humid. After nearly 2 hours, their engines screaming on the verge of overheating, the formation reached the point where they had to jettison their drop tanks and begin the climb to altitude for the attack. At precisely 0930 hours, just 4 minutes before the scheduled arrival time, a miracle occurred. The American fighters spotted 2 Type 1 Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zero fighters, emerging from a cloud bank below. They had arrived exactly on time, exactly where they were supposed to be. Major Wilson gave the order to jettison the remaining drop tanks and engage. The cover flight immediately engaged the Japanese Zero escort, pulling them away from the 2 bombers. Lanphier and Barber, the remaining killer flight pilots, dove toward the slower, unarmored Betty bombers. The attack was swift and decisive. Barber aimed his cannons and machine guns at the bomber on the right, which he identified as carrying Yamamoto. He raked the fuselage and the wing root, causing the bomber's left engine to immediately smoke and burst into flames. The plane spiraled down into the dense Bougainville jungle. Lanphier, believing the lead plane was his target, executed a hard turn and dove toward the second bomber, tearing into its wing. This bomber also crashed into the jungle canopy. The battle lasted less than 4 minutes. The P-38s, having completed their mission, immediately turned and began the long, perilous journey back to Guadalcanal, their fuel gauges already registering dangerously low. They had flown to the very edge of mechanical and human endurance, fought a brief but decisive battle, and returned to tell the tale. The confirmation of the kill came a few days later, after a Japanese search party found the wreckage deep in the jungle. Admiral Yamamoto's body was found, still strapped into his seat,
beneath a shattered tree. The Japanese government concealed the death for a month, but the psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The loss of their most brilliant strategist was an irreplaceable military disaster, confirming a growing dread within the high command that the war was not being won by their spirit, but was being lost by American intelligence, superior technology, and relentless execution. The success of Operation Vengeance was a synthesis of effective intelligence, superior technology, careful planning executed with tactical flexibility, and exceptional flying skills. The fact that the entire operation remained secret, with the Japanese never conclusively proving that their code had been broken, amplified its effectiveness. The longest fighter intercept mission in history had achieved its objective through extraordinary planning, eliminating Japan's most dangerous military mine. April 18, 1943, had dawned with 18 American pilots preparing for an impossible mission. It ended with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto dead in the Bougainville jungle, Japan's naval strategy in ruins, and American victory in the Pacific increasingly inevitable. The age of strategic assassination had begun, and warfare would never be quite the same.